You got us, PJ?
Yeah, I got it, Chief. Good afternoon, everybody. It's PJ Norwood for today's Fire Engineering Google Hangout for Wednesday, June 22nd. We have a whole host of great, phenomenal instructors and fire service leaders on today with us. Frank Ritchie bailed out on us on the last minute, so we sent out some panicked emails. We got a whole big group of people, which is phenomenal today. We have a few good topics that we want to discuss, and ultimately we're going to be talking about the 360 size up and this week's IAFC safety stand down. But unfortunately, because of the absolute tragedy that has taken place in Orlando, and we know what our brothers and sisters are going through there, we brought on Steve Hamilton today to discuss briefly in the beginning regarding the active shooter. And of course, we have the Chief with us today to discuss this month's fire engineering's issue, which definitely has some interesting things regarding this. Unfortunately, coincidence that we have some active shooter stuff on this month's fire engineering just in the same time that Orlando is experiencing what they're going through. So we're going to start off by going to Chief Walton. He's going to give the intro, talk a little bit about our sponsor for this show, and then we'll quickly introduce everybody that's on the call today. So, Chief, take it away.
Hi, and thank you so much, PJ, and welcome to this week's Humpday Hangout. Listen, first of all, I got to give a shout out to Tenkata Fabrics. Without Tenkata Fabrics, we couldn't be doing this incredible show. Go to Tenkata Fabrics. That's tenkatafabrics.com. I'll tell you what, when it comes to commitment to the mission, Tenkata's been around for 400 years. They used to make sails for the Dutch Navy. Honest to God. Incredible company, incredible leadership, and the fabrics are inherently fire resistant. So in other words, when you buy Tenkata Fabrics, they're not infused with chemicals to make them fire resistant. They're not toxic. They're actually inherently fire resistant fabrics. So if you put your bunker gear in a time capsule and pulled it out 20 years from now, it'll still be fire resistant. They're an amazing corporation, amazing set of fabrics. All the major fire garment folks use them. So but make sure when you're speccing your gear, take a hard look at Tenkata Fabrics. They're great friends of fire engineering, great friends of FDIC and myself. And on that point, real quick, one of my great friends there, Tenkata, recently suffered a stroke, and he's a wonderful, brilliant, sensitive, decent guy. Loves the fire service, so please keep him in your thoughts and prayers. Hey, real quick too, next week rather, on Monday of next week, I'll be down at the Illinois Fire Services Institute with Gavin Horn, Denise Smith, Kenny Fent, Stevie Kerber, and the usual suspects. Sean, are you going to be down there with us?
No, sir, I can't make it this time.
Okay, well, Matt will be there, Jennifer, a bunch of great firefighters. We're continuing the experiments on fuel packages and toxicity, fires and toxicity, the cardiovascular carcinogenic risks involved in firefighting. Well, now we're looking at a study of the fire services training environment, safety, fidelity, and the risks. So we're going to be doing some great experiments down there, and we're going to be streaming them live to you. So from 8 o'clock in the morning Central Time, which would be 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern, we'll be doing some live broadcasts with Gavin and the rest of the team actually watching the experiments. And then at 6 o'clock in the evening, which is 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Central, don't know when that is in California, but we'll be doing a roundtable. And so please join us for that. That'll be this Monday, a full day of talk about the fire environment, fuel packages, heat flux, loading, bunker gear, heat stress, cardiovascular. It's going to be an amazing day with some of the most brilliant fire minds in the service today. So please join us. That's absolutely free, brought to you by Globe, our good friends at Globe. So please join us for that Globe-sponsored presentation. This month's fire engineering, we're going to get into this right now, tragically, has two features in it. One of them is the anatomy of a department's response to a hostile shooting event, a hostile response plan. Scott, and I'm going to butcher Scott's name, but I believe it's Finazzo. It's Finazzo. Scott wrote an incredible piece on the anatomy of Kansas City's response to a hostile event. And then we had a group of people send in a tremendous article about hostile events and command, and it's called Hostile Act Response, Effective Command in the Warm Zone. and it was sent to us by Stiles, Neal, Neglia, Cumberledge, Kiger, and Rice. Just coincidentally. But talk about timely. Talk about being in step with the fire service. You are. These are the issues that are important to us. You know, what happened, the terrorism that happened in Orlando, terrorism is here on our shores, whether you know, San Bernardino, Boston, now, and many, many others, Fort Hood, and now we're talking about terrorism in Orlando. We get called. You're responding. So to that, we brought on Steve Hamilton today to talk to us, because Steve, aside being a world-class firefighter, is also a police officer, tremendously aware, alert, and educated on hostile environment responses, regardless of the type of weaponry. Stephen has done a tremendous amount of work getting himself prepared for that. So, and then we just kind of want to start off there, and then I think everybody on the panel is going to have something to say. So, Steve, where are we at in terms of hostile response? Where should we be? What are the building blocks that we should be talking about getting into our organizations in order to be ready for when terrorism hits our communities?
Well, Chief, I think the biggest issue, the biggest thing that departments need to look at is you need to know and understand that your role in that type of event is not hinged on what you can and cannot do. Your role in that type of event is hinged upon what your local law enforcement agency can do. And as I talk to people about preparation for active shooter and other things, I say you need to look at what can my law enforcement agency provide. If your law enforcement agency only has 3 uniformed personnel on the street at any given time, you can't do dynamic entries. You can't do rescue task force because they don't have the manpower to support it. So the very first thing that you need to do is liaise with your law enforcement entities and see what are they bringing to the table. What can they provide you as far as tactical personnel, training, and things along the lines of that nature. That's the first step. Don't carbon copy something that you read in a white paper or some other type of guide, or look at what another department has done without first analyzing, is that department of equal size and complexity of my department? And does their law enforcement agency have the same stuff to bring to the table as my law enforcement agency? It's a long event. So the first step in identifying what you can and can't do is to talk to law enforcement and see what they can bring to the table.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Anybody else wants to chime in? I know Steve Marsar, you've done an incredible amount of work with the NYPD in that regard. And I know we don't want to give too much away to the bad guys who may be monitoring this conversation, because the bad guys do stuff like that. But anything you could add to that?
Well, certainly, like Steve mentioned, comparing yourself to a like-sized department, like-sized municipality is huge. People confuse fire departments all the time with what they see on TV. They think every fire department can do technical rescue and cave rescue and wildland firefighting. It's just not the case. They may not have the training or the capabilities to do that. And I think the same thing happens with police departments as well. In the FDNY, we have teamed up, both the fire and EMS side of the FDNY has recently teamed up with the counterterrorism task force with the NYPD with joint training, and we're actually standing them up at events as we speak to operate in the warm zone and do the things that need to be done in that kind of a setting. So it's certainly it's not the wave of the future. It's actually here. So everybody should be at least thinking about it and comparing their capabilities and making decisions on what they can and can't do. And probably the biggest problem we have in the fire service is holding our people back. So from a leadership point of view, a safety point of view, which is what we're all about, that's something we have to keep in mind. This is not a normal event for us by any stretch of the imagination. The hard part's going to be stopping ourselves, stopping our people from getting too involved in that ongoing or developing situation.
I think that each departments really need to look at, and Steve kind of already alluded to this, be realistic. be realistic in what we can and what we cannot do in those situations. You know, you look at my department, we're running with 11 career firefighters per shift, supplemented by volunteers. So what can we realistically do on our own? And I think once we look at the policies and procedures of the law enforcement, know what they can and they can't do and what resources they're going to be reaching out, then we could really find our true role and what we're capable of doing. You know, in East Haven, Connecticut, what am I truly capable of doing with 11 firefighters? Not too much in a situation like that. So having those solid policies and procedures in place and really relying on, you know, your mutual aid partners, but having those agreements and those conversations ahead of time and being prepared is where it comes down to. How about you, Chief Riley? Sean. So we also have Sean Gray on. We'll go to him. I was trying to go to Rick. I'm not sure if he can hear me. I know, Sean, you're brand new. Congratulations to the promotion to the training division in Cobb County. I know your head is probably spinning right now saying, well, now I'm in training, and where does my role fit in on this, and what are our strengths and weaknesses? So what's your initial mindset as being in the training seat right now for Cobb County as we start talking about active shooters?
Yeah, we're actually doing one of the summer drills that our training division is handling is an active shooter drill. We've done them multiple times over the last couple of years. We've had 2 active shooter events or mass shooting events here in Cobb County. We had one at Penske a few years ago, and then we also had a mass shooting event at FedEx. And so they were both, you know, I don't know if you would call them active shooters or not. I think FedEx technically was deemed an active shooter. Where Penske was more of a mass shooting. The person went in, shot a bunch of people, and then immediately left the scene. So, yeah, we're actively going through that. Our SWAT team is kind of heading all that stuff up as far as the fire department response goes. We have lots of people. So we have 5 PD precincts, and I think there's probably about 10 cars per shift going. So we probably got 50 cars that would be able to respond, plus all of the SWAT team. So we can put a good number of people on there. And then as far as fire department related goes, we can put all kinds of people. We can throw, you know, I know for the FedEx shooting, there was we had lots of resources there because it happened to be right at shift change. And the FedEx building is right across the street from one of our firehouses. It has an engine truck command unit, and so they sent like over a full alarm there just to start with some of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think every department out there is probably preparing, especially with Orlando. If they don't have something in place, they're probably working on it right now.
You know, we've also got Sammy Hiddle from Wichita on with us, representing the fine folks from Traditions Training. So, Sammy, what are they doing up in Wichita?
That's actually something. We just got a medical chief, and he is actually starting to work on a policy. And like many departments, you know, we're trying to figure out what kind of commitment we're going to put in the warm zone, how many people we commit to it initially. And then that's something that once we get it ironed out on our side, we're going to have to get with our police department and our other agencies and do some cross-training so that we can get some fluency if we do respond.
Well, and if I may for a moment, I think when we start talking about breaking things up into hot zones and warm zones and cold zones, we have to understand that a terrorist operates very differently than, say, what we traditionally understand as the traditional active shooter. Traditionally, active shooters would go in, they would target gun-free zones, they would target people who were defenseless or couldn't mount some type of defense, and they would engage until someone came and challenged them, or law enforcement would arrive. And when we first started really getting knee-deep into active shooter, we started listening and hearing a lot of expertise where they'd say, look, you know, 40-some-odd% of active shooters kill themselves, and we can't afford to sit in the parking lot anymore and wait. And I agree with that. But I also say that a terrorist changes the game. And as we've coined active shooters as cowardice, and they take their own life and they prey on the defenseless, a terrorist is very, very different. And a terrorist is going to use weapons and tactics and training to repel anybody trying to approach the building, any first responders that show up. So as we talk about hot zone, warm zone, cold zone, know that a terrorist that is mobile, that zone is going to constantly shrink and expand, and you need to be very, very, very careful about how you're going to approach that building and what you're going to commit regardless of your resources. The Washington Navy Yard shooter was in a multi-story building and went from floor to floor to floor, and we could easily arrive and be told that the shooter's on the 4th floor and consider wounded victims on the 2nd floor to be the warm zone, and yet the shooter is mobile. So you need to be very careful with that. You also need to be careful with approaching a building in that manner. You can imagine trying to cross a parking lot to a 4-story building with windows where the shooter can see you, but you can't see the shooter. And we have yet to deal with the multiple aggressor, multiple shooter, active shooter incident, especially one with the terrorism nexus. That's going to change the game dramatically. So you have to try to ID what the shooter's ideology is, if at all possible, and know that certain nuances like IEDs. The presence of IEDs may not necessarily mean that it's terrorism, but it could mean that there's advanced planning, there's training, they're tactically sound, and they may use terrorism tactics, which could be engaging you, law enforcement, or any other responders. So it's an ever-changing problem, and as we deal and come across these different threats and situations, that's going to change how we do business, and it's still very much being defined.
And one of the other definitions we need to keep in mind on that is a multi-prong or multi-incident attack, with simultaneous attacks happening at the same time. Maybe the first attack to sucker us in. So there has to be, not only do our departments and our mutual aid partners have to have a way of communicating with each other that, hey, there's an incident going on, whether it's in Orlando or anywhere else. There's an incident going on. Your situational awareness has to be up, because you might go out on something that you think is unrelated because you're not in Orlando or wherever, but certainly it could be related, and that could be the first of several attacks going on at the same time. So there has to be a communication component, and we have to be aware of that what we're going to may not be the only event, or it may be the first, second, or third out of multiple events. They deal with it in the UK all the time.
Well, unfortunately, they will continue to change their tactics and their means of destruction. And us as the fire service, we just have to be prepared. Being true to the basic, we're paying attention to what's going on, not just in our backyard, but also across the country, and being prepared as we can. I remember up in Boston within this past year, they had some, issues with protesters, and they had protesters lock up the highway, and Boston had to deal with, those types of protesters. I think they were securing their hands within 55-gallon drums filled with barrels. They were putting their hands into those barrels and handcuffing themselves in, and they had to figure out ways. And if we just pay attention to what's going on throughout the country and making sure that we're prepared as best that we can be, but also going back to what are we truly capable of handling with the resources that we have, and making sure that we know what we can do and not putting our people into positions that they can't handle or in above the head.
Kind of makes you miss the good old days when we were just worried about giving a decent size up.
Ain't that the truth? So, I know I want to kind of move on here a little bit, but I also think we need to, think about our brothers and sisters in Orlando. I can't imagine firsthand what they're going through, but I'm sure we all have some experiences that we can reflect back to know what they are going through and what they're dealing with in the days and the weeks following an incident of that magnitude, not just a local issue, but also a national issue, and they're going to be reliving this incident in their heads when they heads down to their pillow every night for years to come. So everybody watching today, if you know somebody in that area, reach out to them, say hello, check in with them, see if they're doing okay, and know that we have a lot of great friends throughout the country that are there for each other, and this may be the time that we need to be there for our brothers and sisters in Orlando in the days and weeks to come.
Absolutely.
Chief?
Well, I think that the most important thing about any incident is to learn from it and to grow from it. And the great writer Nassim Taleb has pointed out that there's things that are fragile, resilient, and anti-fragile. The fire service is anti-fragile. We take hits and we keep on growing. We get better, we get stronger, we get more prepared, we get better equipped. So there's a great amount of research currently being done in that regards. So I think that if anything, we'll learn tremendous lessons from this. Men like Stephen will take it apart and break it down for us and get it out there. I would like to move to one thing real quick and get a kind of a quick update on what's going on in the because we got three of the folks, well, four of us are actually very involved in the research and what's going on. Before we move to the topic of the day that PJ had carved out for Stephen to guide us through, but if I know Sammy, you're deeply involved in the on one of the technical panels, as is Sean and myself sit on the board. Why don't we just get a brief overview of what's going on? I know we got some burns coming up in Delaware next month, and besides the burns we've got going on down in Illinois, then let's just get everybody up to date on what's going on there.
Sam, you want to start with fire tech? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me. You've got the screen. Go ahead and go.
I think you have it. It's all you, Sam.
Whoever talks has it.
All right. Mine wasn't changing. There you go. All right. We actually just got the information last week. We're being encouraged to start looking it over, not just for content, but also for how they plan on getting the information out to the fire service. One of the screens is going to have about 16 camera views, so you're going to be able to start looking at other things than just heat. I think we've focused only on temperatures a little bit too much when there's a lot of other things going on. We have oxygen levels, gas levels, we have time considerations, and so being able to look at the individual experiments and see the 16 views, you're going to be able to see what's happening with the temperature in the hallway versus a bedroom with the door closed versus the bedrooms with fire. You're going to be able to see how those guys advanced through that hallway. You're going to be able to see what happened with visibility based on what we did for ventilation. And I think that's going to be really good. And then you can go in and look at the information in detail for each of those rooms or the hallway. Again, this is preliminary. You know, they're even telling us not all the data's in. One of the things that does scare me is the amount of information that is there is tremendous. And we're going to have to be careful, because if we want, a creative individual can go in there and pull out a graph from any experiment to try to justify their position.
Yeah, I think that it's that's one of the things about the research, is that a lot of people tend to take it so that you can pull out points and use it for your own agenda, if you will. Ventilation study is a great example of that. You know, the guys that are pro roof ventilation, they take their piece out and they just harp on those points. Well, you well said that we have this information, and then the ones who are anti-roof ventilation take that and use the information against it. So that's one of the battles with the research, is trying to get that clear message across and trying to not put out too much information with all of it. But I think, Sammy, you're dead on with the fact that we have so much data, which is great from the research standpoint, but at the same time, firefighters get a little overzealous with what they read into things when it seems like every one of these studies that we do, we actually learn more and what to study in the next time. It's like, oh, we learned something there. Hey, we need to look at that and try to figure out what was going on there. So it's kind of cool, just because it's this constant evolution of things that we're continuing to learn. I know that most of the guys on the fire tech panel will admit that, hey, man, there was a ton of stuff that I learned that got to see from the actual research and some things that went on inside, and then there was a lot of stuff that we already knew that kind of validated that, and that's really what's good about the research. It gives us validation for some of the tactics that we've been doing for a long time.
I think, and I think that's a great point, is that we all suffer from what they call confirmation bias. In other words, whenever we read something, we tend to place more emphasis or more credibility or more importance on the things that support our constructs or our opinions or our whatever we're predetermined to find favorable. So, which is that's just human nature, and we're never going to change that, and it's okay. I think what's neat about a lot of the fire service today is that I think we're a lot more open-minded than people give us credit for. Like in any other event, it's the old adage, we tend to spend 80% of our time on 10% of the population. I think we hear from about 2% of the population, and people think that that's the voices, when the reality of it is that most of the fire service is very interested, very curious, and very much involved in looking at how any piece of information can support or improve or modify our tactics and our approach to getting the job done, whether it's active shooter, whether it's size up, whether it's a fire attack. So it's good to hear that we're getting a lot of data. As Sammy said, one of the problems always is data overload. You can have too much information. If you don't believe me, well, I won't even go there because my wife will get mad at me, but it's a great joke. But so I'll turn it back over to what was the guy? Tony Soprano. I'll throw it back to Tony Soprano.
Well, thanks, Chief. I appreciate it. Making fun of my temporary divorce with my razor while I'm on vacation from work here. We do have a question through the Twitter feed for Steve Hamilton before we move on with the 360 size up. Steve, can you briefly explain there's more to a ballistic vest than just throwing one on? Basically, there's no one size or one make model that fits all. Very similar to our structural firefighting gear and our PPE. There's some that feel that, hey, turnout gear is turnout gear. But luckily, because of our education through Tincata and our good friends over there, we know that that's not the case. That there are many combinations of structural firefighting gear to meet our needs in our area. Is that the same with ballistic vests? And if we have departments looking at ballistic type gear, is there somewhere that you can point them to look to help them and guide them to make sure that they receive the right information so they have the right gear that they need?
Sure. Ballistics protection, and when I teach classes, I let people know that bulletproof vests are not bulletproof. That's why we don't call them bulletproof vests anymore. We call them ballistic protection. There are many different levels. There's level 2 through 4, and to understand what each level does, you can look it up on the internet. I mean, level 2 will protect you against 40 caliber round, 9mm round with a velocity less than 380 some odd feet per second. And then as you start going up in the different levels, you start getting different protection for weapons systems. So a level 3A will protect you against 44 Magnum and things like that. Starting to get into level 3 and level 4, you're talking about hard plate armor and you're talking about rifle rounds. So it depends on what are you looking for out of your body armor. Are you looking for something that'll protect you in a rescue task force situation where you're going to be putting people into an environment where they may come in contact with rifle rounds? Then you're going to want rifle round ballistics. If you're looking for something like, say, you're in Chicago and you have a very high crime rate and a very large murder problem and a huge gun problem, are you going to want to wear ballistics protection that the law enforcement officer wears day to day, which is a level 2 or a level 2A? It just depends on what you're looking at. Day-to-day stuff, you can obviously go with what law enforcement carries, but what you need to understand is what that will protect you against. If you're going to an incident and it's reported that an individual has a rifle, know that the body armor that you're wearing won't protect you against rifle rounds. So it's almost like you shouldn't be wearing it. And in the DVD that I have with Penwell, Responding to Scenes of Violence, we actually set that up. We set up high-speed cameras, and we shot level 3A body armor, which was for handgun rounds with a rifle, and it went right through it. We shot it with a high-speed camera, and you can see it go right through it. So you need to understand what you want to use your body armor for. And if you think that you're in the mindset of going down the road of a rescue task force, then go with a higher level. Go with a level 3 or a level 4 hard-plated vest carrier and the trauma plates, and you're protected against all kinds of different things, from rifle down to handgun. But you really need to talk to different reps. You really need to bring out people from body armor companies. They'll do the same thing that bunker gear companies will do. They'll come in, they'll bring you a bunch of different options. You can try it on. You can see what works for you. They'll tell you, the nuances of the PPE, and you make a decision from there. The biggest thing is, what do you need it for? Day-to-day stuff or team-oriented stuff?
Well, good advice. Hopefully that answered their question. And if not, if you're watching, you have more information that you'd like, feel free to contact Steve Hamilton, and he'd be happy to have a discussion with you and help you and your department and put you right down the right path. So, Steve, thank you for that information. So today's show was originally discussed. We wanted to brief Steve Marsar on to talk about the 360-degree size up. But we also felt that this was a good week to bring him on and discuss this 360-degree size up, because right now, from June 19th to June 25th, is the IFC Safety Stand Down. And the topic of the stand down this year is the first 5 minutes, stretching the initial hose line, putting water on the fire. So that's kind of the overbearing topic. And I think having Sean Gray and Sam on today from the Fire Tech panel will really bring a good perspective to that also. And how this came up a couple months ago during one of our hangouts, we're talking about the 360 and the size up, and Frank Ritchie made the comment that he doesn't feel that the first due officer, the first lieutenant on an engine company, or the first due captain on a truck company should be doing the 360s. In most of his neighborhoods, it's really not possible, and how he feels it should be the first incident commander to arrive on scene. And then we look at the topic of the first 5 minutes, and we all know that getting water on the fire is in the quickest way manner is what we should be doing. So how do we balance the Fireground and getting that 360 done immediately, but also get water on the fire as quick as we can, especially in departments that have limited staffing, such as mine. So I'd like to go to Steve Marsar first. Let's hear his perspective on this topic. Then we're going to go to Sam and Sean and see what they could bring in, especially from their experience on the Fire Tech panel. So, Steve, it's all yours.
Thanks, PJ. Yeah, I think a lot of times with the rules of engagement from the IFC, a lot of people misinterpret them, that when we're talking about a 360-degree size-up, in fact, it says either get or obtain a 360-degree size-up. So it could be 280-degree size-ups. We could send one person to one corner, one person to the opposite corner, where they see two sides of the structure. If it's a structure fire, they can come back, they can discuss it, and move on. So I think the 360-degree size-up is very difficult to do in a lot of areas. Just trying to walk around a private home in most neighborhoods is going to be a hassle and time-consuming. Certainly in New York City, and in any city with the bigger buildings, it's certainly going to be an issue or a challenge. In understaffed departments where they don't have the people to do it, the thing to keep in mind is if we don't do some kind of a size-up, we're putting that first line at risk. Putting water on the fire is always the right answer, and thank God we're finally, getting back to that and focusing on that. There's no time that putting water on the fire is the wrong answer. Almost any way you can do that, things start getting better immediately. But where we're getting caught, I think, in a lot of cases is that first due engine that has a driver, an officer, and a firefighter, and that's it. That officer may be having to help stretch the first line. But if they look at one or two sides, and they're not getting a better picture, a better overall picture, and unfortunately it's happened several times with some of the NIOSH reports where that first due engine company, exactly in that case, is going into a basement fire. They have no idea it's a basement fire until they crawl onto that already weakened floor, and it's too late. Where had they gone around and done or attempted to do a 360-degree size-up, they might see fire blowing out of those basement windows on one side or the other and realize, hey, maybe we have to do something else. So I think it has to be taken with a grain of salt. It's not necessarily that the first due officer has to do it. The first due incident commander certainly needs to get that information. But we have to do something. So that even that first due officer in an understaffed department, an engine company that only has 3 firefighters on it, it has to be attempted, maybe simultaneously. But it's going to be more difficult than I think a lot of people realize, and that's our challenge.
Steve, that is absolutely a challenge. When we start talking, vertical ventilation, and one of the things I train my guys is when you get to the roof, take a look to the rear and let the incident commander know what's going on in the rear, because he may or she may not have done the 360 yet, or conditions have changed. So being up on the roof is even a good vantage point. I think you mentioned it could be just 2 180s put together. It doesn't have to be just one person making a complete lap around the building. As long as all sides of the building get viewed and gets relayed, so everybody's on the same page. I think that is the key. With the safety stand down, it makes it even kind of interesting to share that they're talking about the first 5 minutes and getting water on the fire that quickly. And if you look at my department, my guys are showing up with 2 firefighters per piece. We run 2 twins, 1 engine company. Each has 2 firefighters on it. So you have the driver and you have the rider who's filling in the officer's position. And the more we learn and the more we see about fire behavior, and the more I look at line of duty deaths, and we see this rapid fire progression. And most of the time, I'd have to say it's probably really not rapid fire progression. It's just that somebody missed it because they weren't standing back in the incident command position watching the fire behavior to predict what was going on. So I definitely think that there is some challenges there. I'd like to go to Sam and see what his perspective is on this in Wichita, and on top of with the fire tech panel.
No, I think everybody here agrees it needs to be done. We're a department, we like to get out and get it done before we go in, particularly because we have those basement fires, the view outs, the walkouts. We almost had a bad event a couple months ago where the officer didn't get that 360 right away. They got inside, found out that they had a basement fire. The fire we went to the other night looked like a first floor job. Turns out it was a basement fire. Burned out the stairs from the basement to the 2nd floor. It ended up being a fire on all 3 floors. So me personally, even if we're venting or searching, I like to at least get out and get a 270. It gives us an idea of what we're going to walk into, and that affects how much risk we're going to give. Now, with that said, I also think that the 360 is like ventilation. It's not something we do at the beginning and then we ignore. If you have the ability, or the incident commander, if they need to be mobile, then they need to be mobile. But the 360 is something that should be ongoing. A lot of times we start operating in a quadrant of the building and we think we're being successful, failing to realize that we have problems elsewhere.
Sorry, I just had on mute. Tim, and I could agree with you more. And I look at somebody like our friend Anthony Castros, who does a phenomenal job in education in command, and they command from the vehicle. I don't think I can ever do that. However, the more and more I look at that, the more and more value there is to that, if and when you can. But that does prevent you from doing that 360 or those, Steve said those 2 180s. But if you have the resources that you can do that, and seeing all 3 sides, because of our limited staffing, my engine companies never stop short of the building. They always drive past the building to see 3 sides of the building. So they're at least getting that global picture that they can, because that rider's getting off by his or herself, stretching that initial hand line, and they're not going to get the chance to see 2 or 3 sides of the building if the operator doesn't always pull past the building. Some will say, well, that leaves room for the truck. Well, unfortunately, we have a truck, but it's only 2 firefighters in the truck, so we really don't have a dedicated truck company to fill that role. But it also has the added benefit of leaving the front of the building open for the truck as well. So there are ways around it. I do agree that it has to be done. It has to be done early, but it may not be the first arriving officer. I think getting water on the fire is I don't want to say more important, but is extremely important, especially in that first due company's responsibilities, and maybe assigning a second due officer, or the first, as Steve and I talked about earlier, that first arriving incident commander can fill that role to make sure that 360 is done, or has taken all the bits and pieces of information from the other officers and the other arriving companies to put a solid 360 together. And I do agree that 360 is an ongoing. I train my firefighters that we have the overbearing scene size up, But then we also have the task size up. If they're going roof ventilation, they have a roof ventilation size up they should be doing. If they're going in for a search, they should be doing a search size up. If they're going in on fire tech, there's a fire tech size up. That's always an ongoing piece. So let's go to Sean Gray, and then we'll get back to Steve Marsar.
Yeah, so PJ, you mentioned there, something we had to talk about in our department was that we had guys getting out, and because you call it a 360, they get out and do a lap around the building, and they felt like, okay, well, I got to get out and do a lap. But then we did some education pieces where we're like, well, are you really seeing that on a lap, or is this just a checkbox on your command clipboard? And people were admitting, hey, yeah, it's just a checkbox because that's something that was on the promotion exam, so I got to get out and do a lap. But really, that size up when you first pull up, you get to see, most of the time, get to see 3 sides when you're pulling up. You really just need to go to the back, check that back, and now you've seen all 4 sides. So we're kind of getting away from the terminology of using a 360 rather than we're saying, hey, make sure you see all 4 sides. We are a department that commands from the car. Our first 2 officers get off and go to work, but once the battalion chiefs get there, they'll usually have that first 2 officer or somebody that's been assigned a safety officer or some type of other operations officer come and meet with the incident commander at the scene. So we definitely do a little bit of the Castro stuff, commanding from the car. They try to get a decent view, maybe a driveway across the street or something like that, but just depending on the building and the setup, we have lots of apartments, and so sometimes by the time that all the equipment is piled in there and the chief gets there, he may be a lot further back, and that's going to be something that he becomes an accountability officer for the most part, and the active officers that are working, doing fire attack, ventilation, and everything else, so they're really the ones that are commanding their crews from on the actual scene, where the incident commander is mostly just keeping accountability.
All right, good perspective. Before we get to Steve Marsar, I'm going to go to Steve Hamilton. He's not just a retired police officer and active shooter guy. He also plays on the Fireground every once in a while, right, Steve? So let's hear your perspective on that. We'll bring it back to Steve, who's really, I look at as an expert as far as victim profiling, and I'm interested to see how he feels putting together getting water on the fire in the first 5 minutes, getting the 360, but also looking out for the victim, how we can put those 3 pieces together. So Steve Hamilton, let's hear your perspective.
Well, we have staffing issues just as much as everybody else does, and with some of the new science and looking at the different thought processes on vent search and attack lines and how to place, where to place them, looking at smoke. One of the big things that we identify with our limited staffing is before you touch that front door and you've done your 4-sided view and you have reports of a victim trap, find out where that victim is. You may accomplish a vent or isolate search for a rescue before you touch that front door, because touching that front door may create your flow path, and your victim may have had a good survivability profile. It's gone now because you've created that flow path, increased that oxygen, and raised the seat of that fire. So what we've been training on is trying to get people into that mindset where your first due engine will arrive. Somebody try to attempt to get that 4-sided view, get with any occupants and figure out, hey, do we have accountability for everybody? And if not, where were they last at, and where's the best place that I can get to that person using Windows or whatever have you. We actually had an incident, and it's kind of scary. We had a simple laundry room fire in a residential area in my box alarm, and when the assistant chief actually drove past the incident location because he was looking for smoke, he didn't see anything. And just to give you that picture, when the engine company pulled up, everybody's out in the front yard. Hey, yeah, we had a small fire. It's in the laundry room, et cetera, et cetera. They're looking at the house. They have no indication there's a fire at all. Open up the front door, and smoke comes rolling out. Advancing hand line down to the hallway. Yes, they have a laundry room fire. It burnt down about a third of the hollow core door. Put the fire out, started looking and checking it, and what they found out is that the fire had left that, went into an air conditioning return vent directly outside the laundry room that had a plastic tubing, and then started to spread fire in the subfloor. And on arrival, there's nothing. On arrival, you see nothing, and you have fire burning in the subfloor, or in between the first and the second floor. And luckily for the crew, there was a water line for the laundry room running through there that melted and actually put the fire out in that space. So now we're teaching people, hey, just because you get your view and you don't necessarily see anything, don't think that the construction isn't such that you have a big problem surrounding you and a big problem growing above you. Even though it's a laundry room fire and it appears to be nothing, you know, break ceiling as you move, let your incident commander know what's going on, and try to be as safe as you can when you operate in that type of construction.
Great points. So, Steve Marsar.
I think you all bring great points that we definitely need to concentrate on departments that are understaffed or short-staffed, and they have, because face it, they have more of a challenge, I think, when it comes to things like that. But so we've kind of covered that 360. Maybe it should be called something else. I think it was Sean or Steve said, 360. That's what it sounds like. You got to go around, but it's a four-sided look. Sounds a lot better to me. I like that. So you're not you don't necessarily have to go around 360. You can look at it from two different sides and get four sides of the structure, the building, the brush fire, forest fire, whatever it is. So it does apply to all kinds of emergencies, all kinds of fires. But I think we've proven no matter what we call it, no matter how we attempt to do it, it has to be done, and that's the key. We're trying to prevent and save preventable line of duty deaths, and that's obviously a key. And I think each level of command, the firefighters have to focus on their job, their task. The company officer has to look at the bigger picture. Certainly, incident command is looking at a much more overall picture. And then, of course, somebody mentioned the safety officers and assistant safety officers. When they get there, they're trying to get the whole picture and look at it from a much higher view from even that of the incident commander. So, that being said, if we can do that, if it can be done fairly quickly, if we can see three sides of the building, we only need to look at one more. And if we can get that look while somebody else is stretching that first line, come back, help them out, that's pretty awesome. So I think that's a great perspective on that 360-degree sizing.
I like that as well. I like that four-sided look. We'll coin that phrase today. Chief Fulton, I know with you have a global look and a global feel of the fire service. What's your feeling on the 360 and how we actually get it accomplished, along with getting water on the fire within that first 5 minutes, especially for those, I think as Steve said, the short-staffed departments? I kind of like how you said that, Steve.
I think that one of the things that people often fail to observe, and I think this panel are who you are because you don't fall into that trap, is that you recognize that although things may happen in your organization a certain way, that's predicated on the fact that you've got the resources you have, the training you have, the demographics of where you are, the issues that surround the area that you are at. When it comes to gathering information on the Fireground, the 360 is absolutely, or as much information as you can about the building. And remember, when we're talking about doing a 360, it's not just the building, it's the exposures, it's the opportunity for maybe an alternative water supply, it's evacuation routes, it's collapse zones. I mean, it's getting a robust idea of what you're up against, and it also has a lot to do with wind direction and vulnerabilities. When you're going around the backside of a building, you might recognize that the wind's blowing out and there's an open window, and that could be contributing to some of your issues. It's also, important when we talk about the context of the environment that we're fighting the fire in. In other words, you can have a really, really tight building that somebody referred to earlier, a very tight building that's not letting I think it was Steve was talking about the tight building that wasn't letting the smoke out. Or you can have a building that's not a tight building, where you see the smoke pushing out and the building's actually breathing a little bit, which gives us other indicators. So it's always a very local issue about how we gather information, about what information we gather, and why it's important. And it can become local down to the event, which is really important. But what's interesting is that we always overlay our experiences and our systems and our beliefs on top of other people's events, and then tend to criticize. Hindsight bias is huge. If you look at some of the older NIOSH reports and whatnot, and you see where these people in hindsight bias have created a very linear picture of what happened, because that's what our brains do. Our brains tend to put things into A went to B, went to C, went to D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When the real Fireground, it's all happening at once. So I think that when we talk about getting a good idea, gathering as much information as we possibly can, getting a good idea of the entire building and everything we can about it as quickly as possible is excellent. I think the faster we can apply water to a fire is excellent. I think there's always going to be exceptions to that rule. If you roll up and there's people at the windows getting ready to jump, obviously, catching them might be the priority. So, you always have to be careful about the always and never statements, which folks are so fond of, and we learn to avoid those as we get more experience under our belts. But I think that and it's interesting when we talk about the first 5 minutes and what's important in the first 5 minutes. It's going to be different from event to event, and the faster we wrap our heads around that, the better. And I think that the 360 is a great expression. 4 sides is a great expression. But you be careful about is don't just focus on the fire building. You've got exposures to worry about. You've got where's that smoke going to worry about. What do you have going around you? In some fires, you have to worry about your runoff. Where's your runoff going? If you're fighting a fire near a river or a stream, what kind of effects could your runoff have? So there's always a lot of nuance to every fire, and what I think is important is recognition prime decision making will get you so far. The faster you can get support to that decision maker, the better. So I'm a huge advocate of the first do, sizing it up and going to work, and then command level officers commanding with support. So that's my 2 cents.
But Chief, I think that's a good point, and I've talked locally with other safety officers and chief officers, and we do a really good job at calling mutual aid for companies, engine companies, truck companies, rescue companies, but we very rarely, if ever, think about calling mutual aid for command officers. My fire department, we run 1 battalion chief is the only officer on the shift. The engines don't even have officers; they're just firefighters. So we have 1 battalion chief running 10 career firefighters, and then volunteers. And I tell the battalion chiefs, hey, you could call mutual aid for 2 more command officers. You don't have to bring engines or trucks. You may not need those. You can call for help for whatever you need, but you got to call. And all too often in small departments, we try commanding these incidents with just 1 or 2 people, when sometimes we need to special call a mutual aid just for those command officers as well.
And that's not to monopolize the conversation, but when you think about it, for some of the older firefighters like myself, that's a great volunteer role that they can play, or ancillary role that they can play. In Albuquerque, when I was there, every working fire got a minimum of 3 chiefs, and there were 5 battalion chiefs on duty at any point in time, or 4 battalion chiefs on duty at any point in time, but 3 went to the fire. And people used to say, well, what if a fire happens in their first do? Well, we had these really complex devices called radios, and we could get messages on them. They weren't text, fancy stuff like our phones get us, but people would actually talk to us over these radio things, and they could say you're needed elsewhere, and then if they could clear, they would clear. So I think that you're exactly right. The more folks we can bring to support one another, the better decision making there is. And we can go into all kinds of wonky stuff that validates that. If you want to read stuff like Kahneman, and you want to talk about functional magnetic resonating, and you want to talk about Gary's advanced work and Ensley and the people that he have written with, validate all of that. That the more support you can get, the decision making improves, and it helps us to go to what Kahneman calls the system 2 level, where we start to weigh options. And so RPD will get you only so far, and then you need to augment it.
Agree.
Go ahead, PJ. Or I was just going to say, Chief, I think your initial comments are very well stated, articulating how it is a local thing, and And that can change from neighborhood to neighborhood, commercial versus residential. Now, with that said, I think that what we're really saying, regardless of what we call it, 360, 4 sides, we're really saying all sides of the building. But fundamentally, we're trying to obtain information, right? And so if we get that opportunity, and you see somebody in that front yard, I think we should be talking to the occupants. There's usually somebody there that can help us with information. Where are the stairs? Where was the victim last seen? And even if you continue your 360, again, get on that fancy thing we call the radio and let that incident commander know, hey, I just spoke with the occupant. He's standing in the Bravo exposure front yard in a green shirt. That way, if they needed more information, they have it.
Sam, I agree with you completely, and that's you know, I see people all the time obtaining that information, and then okay, I have it, and then going to work and forgetting to relay that information. So again, it comes down to just like everything we do on the Fireground and off the Fireground is just communication and making sure everybody's on the same page. So I'm going to go to
the other thing to throw in there really quickly, if you don't mind, too, is that as much as you can, try to make sure that you can confirm that the person you're giving information to understood it, because you can read fire report after fire report where people confirm something that they hear, but they don't process it. In other words, they'll say the fire's in the basement, 10-4, and then 2 minutes later they're asking, do you know where the fire is? So always try to get that feedback, and I know Stephen, the FDNY does a good job through their radio discipline of getting confirmation back from people about information.
Yeah, and we can't forget our dispatchers, right? We have tremendous amounts of sometimes we have tremendous amount of people and tremendous amount of information out there. All we have to do is ask. And unfortunately, sometimes we can tell the dispatcher, hey, we're getting multiple calls. Well, okay, and reports of people trapped. Well, who's giving you that information? And it leads me into I wanted to comment on a fire that's coming up on an anniversary. Chief Tim Beatty from the Hamilton Township Fire Department in Muncie, Indiana, had a fire coming up on the 1-year anniversary where he was really in a tough position, and so were his firefighters. Basically, it was a fully involved house. The dispatcher was on with a husband and wife trapped in a bedroom, a windowless bedroom. They would only lights to let light in. They couldn't open. They wouldn't be big enough for a firefighter to fit through. The dispatcher had them on the phone. They were trapped. His firefighters were almost literally killing themselves to get into that fire. I'm not sure if he had a safety officer at the time, but doing his size up, he was getting to the point where this is a known life hazard. He was getting to the point where, listen, we're getting to the point where their survivability is pretty slim. And then he had a radio transmission. One of his firefighters had floor had collapsed. They got into a window on the second floor. There was a collapse. He said, okay, that's it. That was the trigger. He pulled everybody out, went to an exterior operation. The dispatcher called, said, after operating for almost 40 minutes on the scene, the dispatcher called back and said, I can hear these people breathing on the phone. And his firefighters made an extraordinary effort to get in there, and they actually found them unconscious. They revived both of the husband and wife, and in his own words, it was a miracle that these people survived this fire. That he's never seen a fire like that where the outcome would have been the same. And he said it could only have been a miracle. But that information was important, but it was also important he had to try and make that decision, a difficult decision, I'm sure, to hold his firefighters back. And that's all part of that size up and one of the hardest things we have to do as an incident commander.
I agree, Steve. I want to get over to Sean. Sean just sent over a message. He wants to tie some of what you're saying into the victim survivability, also some of the work that they're doing in the research side of the house. Sean?
Yeah, so last year up in Illinois, the event that's about to happen next week, we did it last year as well, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the lab rats. And as I was on fire attack, I had 2 other guys on the search crew with me. There was 4 of us from Cobb County that went. And some of the tactics that we've been doing here in Cobb County as far as search goes, it's actually one of the things that we teach for FDIC hot class, the search tactics we use there. We're talking about victim survivability. We're also talking about firefighter safety and survival and using door isolation. So And when we were in Illinois, we had a victim behind a closed door. Well, what we're teaching our guys here in Cobb is that when you go in and you find that closed door, you close the door behind you, you find a victim, take the victim out of a window. Don't take them back in and expose them to the heat, the smoke, and the fire, and back into the flow path and out the front door. I know that scenario was run 18 times, and that particular search crew was the only crew that took the victim outside of that window. And the data was pretty dramatic. I don't have the exact numbers, but talking to Dr. Gavin Horn and those guys have said that the numbers were very, very telling that we kept that victim in clean air. So that's just something I think we should start doing. That's what we're teaching at FDIC in our hot class, and trying to get people to have a different mindset. It keeps us safer. You get behind that closed door, and it's kind of a good thing. So you going into the Safety Survival Week, think about that. If you can get inside, get behind a closed door, and communicate. If you find a victim, get them out. Because we've got to remember some of those doors are fire rated, and they're there for a good reason. We're teaching our citizens to get behind closed doors now. I know we're doing it. Our dispatchers are doing it, closing doors when they exit. We're teaching our kids in the schools to close their door if there's a fire. So vendor search becomes a valuable tactic. I know, like Sam and those guys with Traditions Training, that's something they're teaching with vendor searches. We really have to be aggressive on our VEIS tactics now to get in there and find these people behind the closed doors.
And I'm going to go to Sam next. And I personally think, and I know, Sean, we talked about this, that over the course of the next 10 years, we are going to make many more successful rescues of citizens if we are out preaching closing the door message to the citizens in our fire prevention and education. Because the more they sleep with their doors closed, the more opportunity it gives us to get in there. If we're trained, if we're looking at VEIS as a viable tactic, which it absolutely is, we're going to make a lot more grabs in the upcoming years, which is a huge benefit to our citizens. Sam?
No, I really couldn't agree more. But I think one of the challenges we're going to face when we talk about this is getting away from the romantic view of that two-story and climbing up a ladder and bringing them down a ladder. And when you look at the demographics and some of the new footprints on residential homes, we're, particularly in our community, we're moving away from those 2 bedrooms and a master bedroom upstairs. People are more interested in square footage, and so we're getting a master bedroom and a single residential, which means all the other kid bedrooms, guest bedrooms, are going in the basement. So when you start looking at that, and then you look at the demographics, at the very least, depending on nationalities, we will have 2 to 5 children. If only 1 bedroom upstairs, where a lot of our best opportunity is going to be. Then you start looking at window wells, things of that nature. One of the things we teach is if you are going to vest a basement, then rather than break that window out, if you're dealing with the sliding window, try to force that window open. That way, if you get into that window well, you can shut that window, which is no different than shutting that door. Because it's going to be a challenge for us to get our victims out of a 3x4 area that's about 6-7 foot deep.
Yeah, that is going to be a challenge. We haven't seen that in New England as far as those layouts just yet, but I'm sure it's coming, or I'm sure that it's here, and that goes to the testament of getting out in your community and seeing what challenges you have before the fire comes in. I'm going to go to Steve Hamilton, then we'll go to Steve Marsar. We'll have Chief Fulton wrap it up for us. So, Steve Hamilton. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can.
Yeah, I cut out for a minute there. Yeah, when we were talking doing VES and some of the VES training that we've done, knowing that when you break a window, if you immediately see some black smoke, if you immediately see some charged stuff, and you believe a victim is in there, is kind of changing the tactic of get in and close the interior door immediately. Search the area within the bedroom, then open the interior door and check your hallway. And the idea is to kill that flow path as soon as humanly possible, because even if your victim is out in the hallway, when I close that flow path, I'm cutting off the heat and stuff coming in that direction. And I've talked to a couple of different departments that preach something similar. Closing that interior door, it saves that time of getting on the ground, sweeping outside the exterior door. How long does that necessarily take you? And then, you encounter a victim in that process. How long is it going to take you to drag that victim back into the room, close the interior door, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So that door control is when do you do it and how do you do it, and keeping the flow path in your mindset when you're doing your VIES. And I found some pictures, and I'll send them to PJ, trying to remember the background story of the 360. And when I was talking about the subfloor, there was a fire. And I'll get all that stuff to PJ, where the officer gets off the truck, sees heavy fire coming from the seaside, believes it's confined to the kitchen area, but he's got a nice black column. He gets off the truck, hang on, let me get a lap, calls back on the radio for a defensive fire attack, and everybody on the truck is confused as to what happened. 2-3 minutes later, the entire 2nd Division collapsed into the 1st Division. And what he saw on his lap is he saw areas of smoke coming out from black smoke coming out from about where the subfloor would be along the siding, and he could see areas that had burned through. The fire had gotten up into there and cleared out that subfloor, and there's interior pictures where you see everything on the 2nd floor is now on the 1st floor. Had they gotten off the truck without that lap and pulled that line, I mean, you probably would have dealt with some serious injuries, if not deaths of personnel. So I'll get that information and send it to you, PJ.
Great. Look who's paying attention. Steve Marsar.
Just to wrap up, I think we came up with some great stuff. I think we've all concluded, at least on this end, that seeing all 4 sides of the structure, fire area, even if it's an outside fire, is important. However that's done, whether it's done by, maybe not first due officer, but certainly the first incident commander, and again, they have to obtain it. They don't necessarily have to do it by themselves. If we've seen 3 sides, all we have to do is look at the 4th side. Gathering that information, gaining the information from anybody who's around, is critically important, and the bottom line is not only trying to save ourselves, but that's going to help us make those decisions on how we can best get water on the fire and how we can best attempt to find people that might be trapped.
Agree. So Sam, let's go to Sam. And Sam, if we're getting to the point where we need to start wrapping up into some of the victim stuff that you guys have found out so far. If you're even prepared or even can talk about any of the victim stuff that you found in the fire attack panel briefly.
Well, I've had some in-depth conversations with Gavin, a phenomenal individual. I think some of the information we have, again, it's going to be preliminary. I don't think in any way is it going to be enough to go out there and just start changing tactics. I think personally, I think some mistakes were made in some of the placement of them, some of the levels. For instance, we had one victim in a high-pressure area, and depending on the location of the fire and how that fire flows is going to dictate whether or not that victim got touched. And remember, these aren't full-size victims. These are very small packages. And by very small packages, I'm talking about less than 1 square foot. So putting somebody in the hallway in the corner may or may not have been a good decision. And again, that's something that I feel based on the way physics and pressures work. I would like to, since we're going to close up, go back to the vest for a second. Like one of my good friends, Scott Kleinschmidt, says, and I hope we do change the way we're teaching people to get out. We now have gases. We're putting out fumes that scientists don't even have names for. They can't even explain the toxicity of it. And we're teaching kids to open the bedroom and go out in there. Well, now we're asking them to basically gauge the amount of smoke and whether or not they can crawl from their bedroom to the front door. We really need to teach them, keep that door shut. Keep the smoke away from them, keep the flames away from them, and then teach their parents to meet us in the front yard and tell us where that best opportunity is.
Very good.
Sam, I agree with you. I've been working out with a small group and trying to work on looking at getting that message out a little bit more globally. I agree. We need to get parents to close their kids' doors and keep them closed. And the whole crawling below the smoke that all of us were taught in grade school is probably not the best option. So thank you for that point. Sean, you have anything you want to add or close up with?
No, I think it's Sam hit the nail on the head. There's going to be a ton of data still to come. everything that they're doing is really groundbreaking. Gavin Horn is an extremely intelligent individual. The guys that created the laser systems in order to measure humidity, I mean, none of this stuff's ever been done before, so it's definitely not going to be perfect. And they're practicing that again coming up next week, helping measure the environments, putting some of the victims in the places that they're looking for, that the fire attack crews are going to be going looking for. And then they're also measuring the toxicity of what we're exposed to as well, swabbing the skins and everything else. So it's pretty interesting stuff. I think we're going to just continue to learn more as we go down the road.
Good. So I'd like to thank everybody. I'm going to pass it back to Chief Fall and wrap up. But for the last minute, for everybody to help me out and bail out Frank Ritchie, we really appreciate it. I think it was a great conversation. I took about 2 pages of notes. I have 2 pages of additional shows that we can spin out of this in the next coming months. So plan to get an email with some requests to join us again in the future. I really appreciate each and every one of you joining us today, bringing your valuable information and giving up an hour of your time today. So thank you. Chief, I'll put it back to you to close out the show and to once again thank each and every one.
Hey, thank you guys, and remember Steve Hamilton for joining us at the last minute. Please pick up your copy of Fire Engineering. Take a look at 2 great articles on how to deal with these hostile events, SOPs, to help us be more effective and be more efficient and safer when responding to these new threats. So absolutely, thank you to Stephen. Thank you, Steve Marsar. We'll see you pretty soon, Steve, and for being on with us today. And Sammy, thank you for joining. PJ, as always, or as I like to call you, Tony Soprano, thank you so much for putting this together and being such a great host. To our friends at Tenkata, thank you, TenkataFabrics.com. Please check it out. And also join us Monday. We're going to be streaming live. We're going to have all kinds of people joining us. We've got an all-star cast. We're going to be streaming live from 8 o'clock in the morning, off and on, all day long until a great panel at 6 p.m. Central. So, if you really are into what we're doing and you want to see what's going on, remember that you can't evolve if you're not aware. So, and everything is going to shift and change, and be part of it. Be part of the discussion. Be part of the process. And it's all of us. We're a bottom-up organization. So be part of it. Join us and have your voice heard and share your thoughts with us while we're streaming live. We'll be doing the FE Talk, so you can send comments to us while we're live streaming. And thank you to our good friends at Globe for sponsoring that for us Monday. Great conversation, great points from everybody. There's just almost too much to try to encapsulate. But thank you so much for joining with us today and sharing an hour of your time on this week's Google Hangout. We look forward to seeing you at the next Google Hangout. Next week will actually be Steve Kerber, and Steve will be following up with science and tactics, and we'll be talking about the experiments and some of the data that's coming in, some of the preliminary thoughts about it, and where we're going in the future. So be sure to tune in next Wednesday for Steve Kerber's Science and Tactics. I'm Bobby Halton. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us, and we'll see you all here again this time next week.
Stay safe.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.